Hello, buddy. Welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and today we're going to be doing the support tier list. And this is patch 15.8, so it's been a long time since I've done one of these, so I apologize for missing out on that. But I am going to try to get back on the wagon here and, start doing a support tier list every patch. I might do some other roles as well, but I would like to do at least the support tier list as we move through, and maybe I can do the patch notes as well at a certain point. My streaming schedule is a little bit different these days. I have still been streaming some, not as much as I used to, but oftentimes it'll be sometime between like 2 and 3, 2 and 4 during the afternoons. I like to try to do that because I'm able to play with Jason. It just makes it a little bit more fun. And on the weekends, sometimes in the evening. And we'll see how it goes. Maybe I can start streaming in the evening again, maybe like 8:30 to 10. That would be without Jason most nights because he works in the evenings. But we'll see. So the stream schedule is kind of up in the air, but, just be sure to subscribe on here if you want to know about that. Follow me on X if you have an X account. Always announce it whenever I'm streaming on there, but it's a little chaotic these days because I'm teaching on Tuesday, Thursday, so I can't stream on those days for now. But anyways, we're getting back to doing a little bit more of this content, so let's get in here. Now, we're going to kick it off, and I will say, like I just mentioned, I haven't played a ton of solo queue. I've played like a decent amount, so I may not know like the exact hottest, builds or whatever that aren't showing up in statistics yet, but I think this gives hopefully a pretty fair sense of what's going on based on sort of my games that I've played, as well as looking at what's been going on in the pro scene and looking at what's been going on in solo queue and Emerald Plus. So these tier lists, as always, are usually kind of targeted towards kind of that mid-range elo, that silver, gold, platinum, emerald. So obviously it's going to change a little bit once you start getting into diamond plus, moving into pro, and then once you start moving down, through bronze into iron, it'll probably be a little bit different as well, based on, the mechanics of champions, what kind of stuff you're playing against, the kind of strategies that are, common. We'll mention some of those with some picks. But I just try to bring together, this data that I have from these different sources and just give you some informed things. Mostly just to think about if you want to play different champs or think about different matchups or, prepare for what you might be playing against. So there's going to be a lot of variation as usual. Just because your favorite champ doesn't show up on here at the ranking you think it should be doesn't mean that it's not playable. This is for just a wide audience, and it's just my limited perspective on that. So that's perfectly fine. So, if you've got a 80% win rate on Pantheon support, by all means play it. If it's working, go for it, play it. But this is just what I'm thinking for a lot of people based on, again, this data. And of course it's going to be imperfect because everybody's different. These are different, kind of player bases that I'm looking at in terms of pro, solo queue, all of that. And of course my own play is going to be, I haven't played as many games, and I play Rakan almost every game. So that's going to color my opinion on some of these things too. But without further ado, let's get in here. So I think Rell is one that probably still has to be mentioned. Now, she has been nerfed quite a bit. Oh, and I could bring up... God, I can't even remember the name of the... where you found out, like, the champion abilities. I guess it's just, this fandom here. But yeah, if we're looking at Rell, she did get a round of changes fairly recently. I think it was within the last handful of patches. Actually, no, it was quite a while ago at this point that she got a big update on 14.23. Then got a couple of buffs, a couple of nerfs. But I think Rell is at the top. If we just look at the stats here in pro play, it's not blowing people away, right? But she's picked a lot. She was the most picked, and this is from 15.7, so they don't have a ton of data for 15.8. I don't think a lot changed as far as the support and Rell getting played. But high presence, okay win rate at 51%, and it's sort of similar with solo queue. I think she's also at about a 51% or so. And so I think she's just a good, solid pick in general. I think she provides a lot of CC, provides a lot of utility. There are some matchups that are pretty good into her. Alistar and Poppy that we'll talk about are commonly picked in Pro against her. And I have been watching a decent amount of Pro just when I'm taking showers or doing laundry or whatever. You know, I'll have some cage roll on in the background. So I've been watching, or at least listening to quite a few different Pro games. And yeah, I think that she can just get around the map relatively quickly. When she's mounted, she gets that movement speed. She has really good gank assist with her E as well, and just allowing the jungler to run in there, and you can both run in there and make some things happen. She has quite a long CC chain. If you can Q somebody to get that stun and then land the crash down on them and then ult, they're probably going to be locked up for at least 2+ seconds. And if they don't have a dash to get out of your ult, they could be locked up even further. All of these are also AoE. So if you happen to be able to queue multiple people or crash down or ult multiple people, then it works really, really well in team fights. And she's pretty durable in the fact that she does get that big shield whenever she comes in off of her W and lands that stun. She can leech armor and magic resist off of people, which makes you more durable and also simultaneously makes them less durable. And she's able to break shields with her Q for any people that are going to have really big shields, which is situational, but stuff like Asterix, an Archmage, or Archangel Staff rather, just if you're against an Enchanter, it's going to put up a big shield, a Lulu, a Janna, that type of thing. There are a lot of shields in the game right now, and just the fact that you can break those with the Q, it is a really nice thing. Now, it gets a little awkward with the combos, and this is why you got to be careful with her, because she is pretty difficult to play in terms of how you want to sequence stuff, because you might need to hold on to this Q for a little bit and not open on it. If they have Asterix and that's going to activate, you might want to just hang out, run in there with your jungler, wait for them to CC them, and then land your crash down, and then when Asterix activates, then you do your Q. Just stuff like that you want to be aware of. But overall, yeah, just very versatile. Her damage is somewhat limited. She doesn't do a lot of damage for a tank, but she is durable. She's got the speed. She can speed up allies. She has, pretty low cooldown ultimate that can CC a lot of different people. So she's just kind of got it all. Now there is, like I said, some interaction with her kit. The Alistar knockback. Her stuff is pretty telegraphed a lot of times. The crash down especially, it's really hard to land that if you don't have your Q already landed. Now you can just run up in their face and press R, and then, while they're pulled in, you could wait till they flash or dash or whatever, then crash down on them. So she has different things, kind of like Rakan, that we'll talk about in a second. Different kind of sequencing of abilities you can do. But if you master her, if you're good with her, I think that is really nice. She can also get away from ganks fairly easily because you still get a little bit of movement speed. I believe they changed that. Yeah, so she doesn't have to be running towards allies anymore in order to get that movement speed. Well, that's with the mount up. With the full tilt, doubles. Yeah, when you're moving within 1200 range. That was a big change I believe they made that helps her out a lot. So you don't have to be running towards an enemy in order to get this bonus. So she can use it defensively with an ally to gain that extra bonus movement speed of 24%. So in other words, it's kind of like, an empowered Karma E or whatever. It doesn't give the shield, but everybody can kind of run away from ganks pretty easily. And if you're in the if you're doing the crash down or whatever, if you're mounted up and you crash down, you can go over small walls as well as a free dash. So you have to practice a lot to figure out which walls you can go over. But that is an option for her to escape stuff, to have tricky gank paths. There's a lot of different things you can do with that that's useful. So low damage, above average survivability, really good utility, good CC chain. She's a solid champ overall. Again, it's going to be a good amount of skill, though, to make sure that you're sequencing the stuff correctly for the right situation. So that's something to keep in mind. All right. Next up, we've got Alistar. Now, this is someone that usually I would not put that high, but I think there are several matchups where he's very good, and I think the change to several items have favored him pretty heavily. So in Pro, I think it looks like he's probably the best support in pro, and he's almost always good in pro because he's very good at tower dives. So whenever he turns on his ult, it prevents a lot of tower shots. He has one of the best level 6 dives in the game. He's very hard to dive himself. So in a lane swap situation, and that's still happening a lot in pro, you can't do it right out the gate, but I think it's like 3 minutes or something. People typically will swap. I guess it's a little bit later than that, maybe 4 minutes. They'll usually swap to be up there for grubs in pro play. And you don't have to have a lot of gold for him. That's one thing I've always talked about over the years, is one of the major qualities, and is a support going to be good or not, especially as you start moving up the ranks into higher elo, is how well does that support function on very low gold. Because you're not going to get a lot of CC, and as the skill level goes up, usually the amount of deaths is going to go down. So something like Alistar that requires almost no gold to be able to function effectively in a fight is really nice, because his ult makes him extremely difficult to kill with no items. Like, it doesn't even, increase by a percentage of armor or magic resist or whatever. It's just straight up a very large amount of damage reduction. So that's always going to be handy. And he's got, a few really nice pieces of CC. So very good in pro right now. And in solo queue, as far as the engaged champs go, a lot of them don't have phenomenal win rates right now. So Rell's is like 51. I think Alistar's is like 52. Yeah, and he still picked quite a bit. So that's really nice for an engaged champ. Usually engaged champs, when they start getting to like 52 and above, that means they're typically pretty good. Because the enchanters will often, especially at lower elos, just have a higher win rate because you don't have to take as many risks. It's just going to be consistent gameplay most of the time. You're just spamming a bunch of shields, hanging out in the back. But, when you're playing engaged champs, if you make the wrong decision, you can die a lot. And a lot of people do make the wrong decision, so it pulls down the win rate quite a bit. But I think there's just a lot more variance in those. If you play these types of champs really well, you can dramatically overperform the standard win rate, but you can also dramatically underperform it if you're making bad engaged decisions. And they have a stat that reflects that. I don't know if this is going to reflect what I'm actually saying here, but I think it's the delta on these champs, and who knows exactly. I don't know how they gather this data, but I think the delta is how well a skilled person on that champ performs relative to someone who is unskilled. So usually the higher the delta something is, the higher the skill the champion is. It could be mechanically it's difficult to play, but it could also be decision-making wise, it's difficult to make the right decisions. So I believe that's what the delta is. Win rate of the best players on a champion from the people at the average tier. So these are the one-trick, challenger or GM players. How much more do they win on this champ on average than someone who is at a lower elo, assuming that you're playing against equally skilled opponents. So GM versus GM, and whatever this is, Emerald versus Emerald. So we look at Alistar, it's almost a 5, right? So it's pretty high, versus something like a Sona is a 2-3-6. So you're just hanging back, chilling, throwing up shields. There is a difference between challengers playing Sona against other challengers and Emerald playing against Emerald, but it's not as pronounced as like Alistar or some of these other engaged champs. Okay. But anyways, so Alistar, I don't think they made that many changes to him that would really move the needle. Go back to Rell here. Well, let me just do Alistar. So they haven't made that many changes, but they did nerf some of the other tank items a little bit over time. If they've nerfed Seeks, they've nerfed Locket. And he'll get those, but he doesn't care as much about the stats being nerfed because, again, he's just going to have really good survivability just because of his ult, regardless of stats. So there's that, but then there's the specific interactions where there's increasingly more dashes, and specifically when you're playing against stuff like Rell, who's trying to do that crash down and come in and land on things, or Leona, who's trying to go in. Rakan, you can headbutt him away too. So there are several of these dive champions, or he can sort of double as engage if you need, but he can also serve as anti-engage. off of his W. There are some things, some matchups that interact with knockups that are pretty good, Samira, Yasuo, stuff like that. It's a little more limited, but it's there. But yeah, you got that point-click engage. You got the flash Q if you're able to get close enough to engage and knock people back. So he has multiple ways he can engage, especially if his flash is up. He's very durable. And you have that extra piece of CC with your E. I guess that's been available for a while. But it is a pretty nice CC chain if you can land all that together. And he just has really high base stats. Like 685 health is massive. I don't remember what Rell's is, but it's probably closer to 600. So he has really, really good base stats. And as far as like his itemization goes, he's a very good user of swiftness boots. A lot of the other boots got nerfed pretty heavily a few patches ago. But swiftness remained relatively unchanged. They may have increased the price by like 100 gold, but they nerfed like plated steel caps, Ionians, they really nerfed hard. Mercury treads, they nerfed pretty hard. So swiftness is one that didn't get nerfed, and he really doesn't need the cooldown reduction as much. He doesn't need the resistances as much as other champs. So the fact they nerfed some of these other engaged champs indirectly through that helps him out. And he's pretty good early on. Like his combo can do quite a lot. So when you're fighting for those early grubs or early dragons or whatever, he's going to be very useful, where some other champs might take a little bit longer to come online. But because his base numbers are so high, he's going to be effective in a lot of these early level skirmishes. But he's still pretty good later on in the game as well. As you can see, it kind of just goes up a little bit in value. And there's a lot of different sorts of items you can get with him. The Solstice Slay seems to still be outperforming. Now, this was nerfed quite a while ago, I think to 30 seconds. I think at one point it was like 15 or 20 seconds. So it's been nerfed quite a bit, but getting that extra 2.5% decaying movement speed whenever you go in and start the fight is really handy. So I think that's nice. Or you can disengage with it, right? You can do your W to knock somebody back and then run away if you need to. So I think that pairs really well with his kit. You can still get the Celestial Opposition, especially if you're against, a lot of ranged burst, Lux, that type of stuff. And you don't always want to press your ult, or it may not be available. This could be good. This does still apply a slow for 1.5 seconds, so it's not a speed up, but it can keep people close to you when it explodes. So if you need more durability, that's good, but Solstice Slay is also pretty solid. And then after that, you can just get whatever utility items you need, because again, he doesn't need a lot of these items. Now, the greedy option, especially if you want to roam around, is Trailblazer, which is going to be pretty handy for him. Locket is just sort of the go-to. Like I said, its resistances were nerfed a little bit. I think it used to be 30-30 on the resists. But it still has the same shield. It's still going to be really effective in team fights. Zeke's is something that I've never been a big fan of Rakan, but it's probably better for Alistar. Because you're going to be in there, you're going to stay in the middle of the fight, you're going to want to keep auto-attacking people, you're definitely going to want to get your stun off of your E on them. So because you're staying close, you might actually get this full 5 seconds of slow around people, and it does add an extra 150 damage. So this might actually end up being a pretty good item on Alistar, versus not as much, in my opinion, on Rakan, but more on that in a minute. And then you can also, just get Knight's Vow. Frozen Heart actually has a pretty high win rate. If they have a bunch of auto attackers on the enemy team, this one could be decent. It does suck that you lost the Hard as a Rock, or whatever it was called, the thing that reduced auto attack damage on you. But you did get 10 more armor. It doesn't quite make up. You're still going to be, for the auto attacks, you're still going to be taking more with autos, but that does help you with abilities that do physical damage. Although it can also be shredded by stuff like Last Whisper. It's still like an okay item in the right situation. And even if you are a little bit less durable with this item than you have been in the past, again, you're Alistar, so that's fine, because you're already going to be super durable. You just want to get whatever's going to give your team, a really good boost or a really good advantage. And usually, in my opinion, if you're not sure what to take, I think just something like Locket, Knight's Vow, you're almost always going to be useful. Okay, so Alistar, still very good. Great interactions with some of the top champs out there, especially against other engaged champs. I mentioned being able to knock away Rell and Rakan, but really stuff like, Leona, Nautilus, even Blitzcrank, like they really don't want to engage on you if you're Alistar. And that's going to help you out with other elements in the game too, like vision control, where you're not as scared if someone's going to hook you. And he does have sustain in the lane too, which is something that a lot of champs don't have. So if you are against these double ranged, and it's pretty popular in solo queue to go up against stuff like, you know, Lux or Brand or Zyra, or just some of these other champs, just being able to, that are like ranged bullies early on, just being able to sustain through that potentially and help your allies sustain through it too with your roar is pretty nice. And in team fights, you get a free roar every time you kill or assist in a kill. So that does kind of help with sort of these longer drawn out fights too. Okay, so Alistar's great right now. And then we have Rakan. So everybody knows I'm going to have Rakan up there. Now, his win rate is not that good in solo queue right now. I think he's at like 49 or 50%. It's okay in pro at 51%. He's still played a lot. I think he's the, let's see, 1, 2. He's tied for third most picked on the last patch, at least, internationally. So, still pretty impactful. And I think, you know, the big thing that holds him back, sort of like what I was talking about with Rell, is he's just a high skill cap support. In some ways, he's very safe. Like, you can get out of a lot of things. I think he's one of the safest ones, maybe with, like, Pyke, because he's got a free dash. With his W, you don't have to have anyone close by. And if someone is close by, you get 2 additional dashes. You can have up to 3 different ways to reposition in fights. And you have your ultimate that gives you a lot of speed that can help you out with those things too. So he has, you know, safety in that sense. And so you can be riskier so you're not punished. And that does make him a bit easier to play. In terms of getting wards and things like that and making great escapes. He's great at that. But in a fight, you have to figure out how you're going to sequence those abilities, just like I was talking about with Rell. You know, are you going to try to open up with just a naked W on somebody that could be flashed or dashed? Are you going to skill check them? If you miss that W, that's going to be bad, right? Or are you going to try to RN, open with that, see if you can walk up to them, bait them to use their dash, and then W? Or do you R and walk up to him and just flash to make sure that you're going to get him, and then you W and knock him up on top of that? You know, there's just a lot of different ways. If you go for the naked W first for the knock up, and then you press R, that's the maximum amount of CC that you can get. Versus if you come in with your R and then knock him up with the W, you're wasting a lot of your R CC duration. Because the W, I think, is a 1 second knock up, and the R starts off at like 1.25 or 1, I guess, and goes up to 1.5. So at level 6, if you RN and you W, you're only getting 1 total second, you know, of CC, because they're going to fully overlap. But if you W first and then you wait on them to land and then you R, then you're getting 2 seconds of CC, which is a big difference. So just a lot of ways to do that. Other things, you can RN and then E onto an ally who is close by on somebody, and that will help you close the gap and get your charm so that you don't have to use your W to gap close. A big part of the skill with Rakan is figuring out when to do that W. When do you hold it? When do you go for it? And you have to dodge a lot of skill shots, right? Many people are going to be throwing stuff at you to try to stop you from getting on top of them. So you've got like your Lux, your Morgana, Xerath, just anything with these skill shots, you have to anticipate it and dodge it, right? Versus a lot of these other engaged champs, these longer range engaged champs, your Leonas, your Nautiluses, stuff like that, you don't really have to dodge that stuff because you just have this long range hook. But Alistar has to do it to some extent too. Now he can break out if he gets CC'd. Lux hits you with that bind when you're trying to run at her. You can ult and break out of it and then go CC her anyways. But Rakan doesn't have that unless you get a Mikhail's or something, or for some reason take cleanse. So he's high skill cap. People don't know how to manage his abilities correctly a lot of times. So, you know, that can be a problem potentially for the general populace. But I think if you practice him, if you get good on him, he has the tools to deal with almost anything, right? Like I said, you can get out of a lot of hot situations. You can dodge skill shots with your R and, you know, get in there with the W. And you can CC a lot of people, so he doesn't have a ton of duration. You know, it's just like 1 second for each of these. But in theory, you could tag everybody on their team with your R, right? And they don't all have to necessarily be grouped up. It's ideal if they are, but sometimes, you know, you can go in, R, E onto, your Sejuani that just went in, charm the couple of people there, and then W and get their backline as well, get their ADC or whatever, and lock them up for a little bit. So there's just so much versatility for how you can use this thing, and it's just, there's a really high probability, if it's a good Rakan player, that he's going to get you. Like, it's going to be extremely difficult to get away from this guy when he can dash twice to catch up to a fight, come in with his R, where he's running 150% movement speed, and then eventually he's going to W on top of you. And oftentimes you're running so fast, you can just run right up to him and force them to flash or dash first, and then you can use the W. So, just so many different things, and he has a shield, so he's extremely good at protecting people. He's one of the best anti-burst champions in the game, because this shield is 150 base, and you can do it twice per cast. So that's a 300 shield. Most champs do not have that this day and age. Even a lot of the enchanters, I think a Janna's shield might be back to 240, a Lulu shield might be 240. They nerfed it way down back in the day, but they've kind of brought it up over time. But yeah, it's a really, really massive shield. Now, you don't get a lot of AP, but it also has a 1.4 AP ratio. So if you do happen to get any AP, so even just stuff like collecting roses or getting a Baron Nashor buff, or if you just get a light AP item, a Shirelia's or something, then it really does add a lot of value to the shield. So you've got this double shield, you've got a heal, which isn't, massive, and this is the last thing that you level usually, but it's a little help. Usually you take Guardian as well, and a very common item on him is Locket. So to burst through a Rakan, you got to get through this 300 shield, whatever Locket's going to do, whatever Guardian's going to do, and it's just a lot. So he's very, very good at protecting against highly mobile assassins, stuff like Zed or whatever, trying to jump on your AD carry. He's really good at dealing with those types of things. Versus other champs, like a Rell might struggle to peel something like a Zed, who's going to be running at the ADC and just blowing them up. And he can get other utility items, enchanter items, and still be very effective, primarily because Celestial Opposition is so strong that you don't have to have, all of the super tank items to be tanky with him. Yes, it's nice if you have more stats, but Celestial Opposition can get you through a lot of burst damage, and then typically you can just kind of dash away or whatever, unless they're turbo fed or they get you for like 3 seconds of CC or something like that. But that means that he can get something like a Mikhail's, right, comfortably, and be able to cleanse off, Morg Binds, Lux Binds, all Ash Arrows, all these really dangerous pieces of CC. You see sometimes in pro play, even things like Alistar will get this item just because it's so powerful, even though he doesn't get a lot of value out of the healing and shielding. It's just that cleanse. It's basically giving a cleanse to your ADC that's on a 2-minute cooldown. So it's really powerful, but he actually does get benefit out of it. He actually does have a really good shield. So Mikhail's is an awesome item on him in a lot of situations. And he can also get redemption. So you can kind of double down on that team fight capability with Locket plus redemption. It's just going to be a massive amount of healing in these team fight situations. So if you're trying to counter stuff, like the R comp of Doom, right? The Amumu, Misfortune, Malphite, Bronze Zodia comp. This may not fully save you if they're super fed, but it's certainly going to do a lot more to help than a lot of other supports are going to be able to do, especially engaged supports. So Redemption, Locket, great combination. So he just has a lot of versatility in how you approach fights and how you itemize, who you want to play around, right? Do you want to itemize for your team fights with Locket Redemption? Do you want to protect against Ash Arrows with Mikhail's? Do you want to help against single target burst by getting something like a Knight's Vow, Locket Vow on your, really fed mid laner? There's just a lot of different options you can go for that are helpful with him. So, that means there's a lot of potential, but that means there's also a lot of room for error that's going to drag his win rate down because people aren't going to play the fights correctly. They aren't going to itemize correctly. And they're just going to be making bad decisions because he does have so many different choices that you could make. So if you're good on him, I think he's great, but it does require a little bit of practice. I think he's an awesome one trick, type of champion, one of the best. Probably he and Thresh are some of the best because he has all that versatility. He's good in almost any meta with any combination of items. He's going to be effective. And you can see this. People argue with me when Rakan is like out of the meta every Worlds. And I actually looked this up one time on stream. It's every world since release except for one. I think it was like maybe 2011 or 2012 when he was like at his worst. He wasn't a top 5 support at Worlds, but literally every other Worlds he's top 5, and the vast majority of the time he's a top 3 pick. So at the high end, if you can play him correctly, he is very good, and he can be good in solo queue, but he's not picked a lot and he's not banned a lot. So that's also what you want if you're looking for one tricks, and I still think one tricking is the best way to level up, at least until you start getting into Masters, where people know you and they might target ban you and, you know, whatever. But yeah, just very effective, good pick. You know, and the stuff that's good into him is usually not very popular right now. Poppy is kind of seeing a bit of a resurgence. We'll talk about that more in a second, and she is like decent against Rakan, especially early on. And then Alistar is okay. I think that Rakan's matchup against Rell is fine. But there are some goofy picks that are good into him, stuff that is really good against mobility, like Veigar, Morgana potentially. Lux is actually really obnoxious to play against, and she's sort of popular, but not super popular. But there definitely are champs, but usually they are not super mainstream champs, so you can blind pick him. And that's a huge advantage of a support too, is if you can swap with somebody and champ select so they can protect their mid lane or top lane pick or whatever, and then you can just blind pick your support, you know, knowing that you're not going to get turbo hard countered. It's like those matchups are annoying, but they're not unplayable. There are some matchups that feel very unplayable if you have them. So, you know, I've tried to play like Sierra or Sienna, whatever, Senna, into stuff like a Pike or a Blitzcrank or whatever, and some of those feel like that is unplayable. Or like Lux into those types of things just feels extremely bad. Sona into that type of stuff. So some things are just really hard counter. It's just, you can't even play the game hardly. There's not anything like that for Rakan. There's stuff that's annoying, but you can play around it. So that's another advantage if you want to pick up and learn Rakan. Okay, last few champs, and I want to speed it up. I don't want this to take too long, but oh gosh. Okay. So Sona is still going to be pretty good. Now, she's not going to be played in pro at all, but I'm mostly just putting her second place because she does have a really high win rate in solo queue. So she's got, like, I think it's like 53% or something right now. And usually it's pretty high. It had been lower in recent memory, but it's still really high. And if you want something that's just kind of simple, that's going to be effective, I think Sona can be good, especially against multiple range champions. So if she just kind of gets to farm off and just harass, and there's not a lot of threat on her early on, then I think she scales extremely well. So if you can just sit in lane and just spam Q, you know, over and over again, just harass with Q plus Airy plus Scorch, that adds up. So if you pick her with another lane dominant ADC, something like a Caitlyn or you know, just anything that's going to just wave clear and just push people in really well, Jen, then she can be really good. So, really high stats. I think they have nerfed her heal, like her W and stuff like that over time, but I think it's still just really, really solid. Basically, if you survive the laning phase and you get a couple of items, right, you get your Archangels plus, you know, Ardent Censer, Staff of Flowing Water, whatever, and you're just able to chill in the back and just spam all your auras over and over again, you're probably going to win a lot of team fights. You're just adding so much extra value that you're probably going to be very well. Now, you know, some of the big challenges of Sona, she is immobile, and if you are pushing in that much, you got to have good ward coverage, because if you get ganked by a jungler, it's going to be a big problem. So you want to make sure you're going to be strong-sided, right, which means that the junglers are not going to camp you. So if you think you might get camped bottom, right, so if top lane is playing something really safe, or like your top laner is just going to totally dominate their top laner probably, or you're noticing that they're dominating the top laner, and their jungler can't go there, or their jungler can't go middle, they got to go somewhere, right? And if you're just constantly pushed into their tower, they're probably going to go for you. Sona is a huge bullseye. It's very easy to gank her if you get past the wards. She doesn't have a lot of escapes. So that is something to be careful with. Also, you got to be careful against some of these hard engaged champs. You know, the Alistars, especially like Alistar, if he flash Qs and then Ws and knocks you back, that's going to be a big problem. Obviously, the Blitzcranks, things like that. So you got to be careful. She does have bad vision control. Most of these enchanters have really bad vision control, especially later on in the game, and that's why often that's the leading reason why they're not played in pro, because you can't walk up and face check a bush. Because your vision is going to get cleared a lot as you move up into higher elos, and you have to be able to go up there and be able to put wards down, right? And if they engage on you and you're Alistar and you've got some allies that are close by, you can probably survive. Or like with Rakan, it depends on the situation, but a lot of times you can get away if you're trying to ward a semi-dangerous area. But with Sona, you know, you can just get blown up instantly. Like just one piece of CC hits you, or sometimes just an assassin sitting in there with no CC and they just drop you, you know, in less than 1 second before you can even react. So very squishy, very vulnerable. She doesn't have any ways to check bushes or to get vision. So that can be challenging. Now, she does roam pretty well, which is another thing enchanters typically can struggle with, because her E at least allows you to speed yourself up and allies up to move around from place to place. Her ganks are not usually going to be that brutal. If you hit them with the slow or you hit them with the R, like that's nice, but you're just not good at roaming, not good at ganking, not good at warding, but you're extremely good at team fights, protected team fights, where you've got another tank on your team and it's just going to be front to back. And that's pretty much it. So, yeah, she's good. So she's risky, but she's very good, especially in lower elos where people are not going to contest you in lane. They may not gank your lane as much. And you're just going to be able to kind of free farm and just scale into team fights for later. You also, another thing that I mentioned, or that I forgot to mention, is you can't really start fights very well. People ask me why oftentimes I'll put tanks up near the top, even though they have a lower win rate. And again, I think a lot of it is the variance, but being able to start fights is tremendously important, in my opinion, for climbing in solo queue, because then you're taking agency. Because the biggest thing is you have to see mistakes that the enemy is making, opportunities, and you have to take advantage of those opportunities. So if they're walking up, you know, with a Sona and trying to ward something, they should not be allowed to ward, right? Something that's too dangerous, but you can't do anything about it because you're playing Lulu or something, and you just, you know, maybe you hit her with a Q or something. That's, you know, you're not punishing enough. Like, you're not punishing that foolish move for Sona to face check this dark brush at 20 minutes in the game, right? But if you're playing something like a hook champ, like a Thresh or a Rakan, Alistar, Rell, something that can chain CC them, that's tanky, then you can punish them. Or if they're stepping up too far in the lane, they shouldn't be allowed to get that cannon, right? You're ahead, it's pushing into them, and they're just trying to walk up and auto attack a cannon. You can't let that happen, right? You got to engage on them, or they just used a bunch of their abilities to clear a wave. You know, you got to punish that. So that's the thing, is a lot of these engaged champs, they can punish people for like foolish positioning, especially as a support around vision. The enemy support will almost always just walk up and try to put a ward over that wall, right? In Baron or Dragon or whatever, and you need to be able to get them. You got to make them pay for that. So if you don't play an engaged champ, you're kind of counting on your team to punish and to make proper choices, and most people at a given elo are going to play at their elo, right? So you're playing a gold game, you're gold, they're going to be making gold decisions, right? Which is going to keep you in gold. But if you can learn how to make really good engages, even though you might currently be gold and you're in gold games, maybe if you start making platinum decisions all the time, you can start engaging, you can start punishing this stuff, then eventually you can move up to platinum. So I think being able to start fights, being able to punish people that are making foolish decisions, is one of the best ways to climb. And there's just, even though enchanters, you know, can get a lot of stats, or even AP champs, they can get a lot of stats, they can do a lot of damage, they can do a lot of healing and shielding. Even though Alistar is not going to have a very good, you know, KDA or stat line, if he's making just a couple of really good engages in a game, that could be all the difference. And that's the stat you should really care about, is getting wins, right, versus losses. So, anyways, it's not that you can't win with enchanters, but that is a major challenge and drawback that I think a lot of people underestimate because they don't think about it. They don't see it. It's not obvious. It's not like, you might think you had a good game, and you're playing Sona and, you're 0, 1, and 10 and your team loses. It's like, yeah, you could have a good game, but one big issue with that is you didn't engage. Like, you didn't take any control over the game. You didn't help your team win. Versus if, something like an Alistar, right? He might have 5 deaths. He might be 0, 5, and 12 or something. But if he had those really good engages and allowed your team to pick up a Baron or allowed your team to get an Atacon or get some good shutdowns or whatever, then that's ultimately going to lead to those wins. So you got to get in that mentality where you're trying to see mistakes and you're trying to punish them one way or another. And engaged champs do it better. You can still do it with Sona. You can still hit them with some auto attacks and Qs. You can still ult them over the wall or something like that. You've got some tools if they try to ward the Baron area when they shouldn't. But it's just a little bit harder usually. Okay, moving on. We got Thresh. Now, Thresh had been kind of in the dumpster for a while. I mean, everybody's always going to love Thresh. He's one of the best designed champs in the game ever. He's really old at this point, but he's still a great design. But I think he did get some love fairly recently. Now, I didn't think it was that significant, honestly. And look at these base stats, though. He's got 600 health. Alistar had like 690 or something. That's a big difference. Alistar's armor is also like 45 or something crazy. Thresh's is 33. Now, this is more than it used to be. I'm pretty sure. He used to start off like real low. God, this labeling system is so freaking stupid. I hope they change it. Just 25.3, man. I know you're trying to emphasize, like, they're trying to emphasize specific themes. Like, oh, it was, Noxus themed, and now it's going to be like Ionia themed or something like that in this next split or season. And I think adding these stories to, like, I think it's cool, but just like, don't mess with the labeling system, bro. Just call it 25, and they want to make it these different splits to try to make it seem like interesting and exciting. Oh, you got to get back in and play. Just call it 25 point whatever, right? And then you can, add on stuff after that if you want. But anyway, so they gave him some extra health. Now, this says his health is 600, so maybe that wiki isn't fully reflecting that. Yeah, and he got a slightly bigger ratio here. So I'm not entirely sure about why he's making the resurgence. A lot of it could be matchup related. He's still not played in pro, like at all, hardly. But he's got a 52% win rate in solo queue, so something's working for him. The flay is very nice if you can time it. It's kind of tricky to do that, but if you can time the flay on like an Alistar or a Leona, Rakan, a Rell Crashdown, like he's very good at peeling a lot of these types of, telegraphed movement-based engages instead of like hooks like Alistar and stuff like that. He does not eat Alistar hooks Blitzcrank. He does not eat Blitzcrank hooks very well. Because it just fully displaces. Like, you can't flay that. It's just like pulling you out of position. But a lot of types of engages he can work with. And then, of course, the hook is very brutal. It's a, second and a half piece of CC that also displaces. And it does quite a bit of damage. Can deal up to 300 damage early on. The lantern is really nice. This does allow you to check stuff like check bushes, so you don't walk into a dangerous situation there. But also allows you to get allies out of scary situations that otherwise they may not be able to escape from. And you can use it to help you pull people in, so you can throw the jungler in when you take these hooks. So he's very fun. He's an amazing champion in that sense. Everybody loves Thresh that's ever played him. I love Thresh. I don't have a great win rate on him. He's really hard to play. He's probably the hardest support to maximize because, sort of like what I was talking about with Rell and Rakan, who were both definitely well above average. I think Thresh is even higher because you can get maximally punished if you mess it up, right? If you go in with Thresh and you should not have done that, you should not have taken that hook, you're in big trouble because he's not as tanky as a lot of other engaged champs and he doesn't have the mobility that Rakan has. So it's a lot higher risk to go in with Thresh. and it just requires a bit more precise technical timing, especially on the flay, to be able to react to stuff. But all of his stuff has dual modes, or at least his first three abilities to some extent. They could be defensive or offensive. And so you have to make decisions. So not only mechanically is it challenging sometimes to hit hooks, and his hook is one of the worst in the game, I would venture to say, as far as like how difficult it is to hit, because it has like a half a second wind up, it moves pretty slow, and it has a very slender hitbox compared to like Blitzcrank or Nautilus hooks. So it's difficult to hit the hook in the first place. I think they should, honestly, he has no presence in Pro right now. I feel they should get rid of that half a second delay. I feel he should just throw the hook right out there. I don't know, maybe that would be OP, or like it should at least move a little bit faster or have a bit more width. When he first came out, I think the chain was like twice as long. I don't think it had the delay on it. There was a lot of crazy stuff when he came out that was a lot stronger. But anyways, as it is right now, he's going to be effective. The biggest problem with Thresh is he doesn't have as much damage early on, and he's not as much of a pure threat, I don't think, as some of these other engaged champs. Like, his CC chain just doesn't feel like it's quite as long. It's harder for him to get to start fights. So a lot of times, you don't have any tools to help you. You can walk up and try to flay somebody first and then hook them if they'll let you get in range, but that can be kind of tricky. And you don't have great access to the back line. So, like, it's hard to hook squishies. And if you hook tanky or beefy champions later on, that can be okay, but, you know, it's not going to be ideal. So you can pull people that are out of position, but you can't really, like, run onto the back line in the same way that you can with Rakan or Alistar or whatever. You can't just get to the back line a lot of times, or Nautilus or Leona. So he's a little bit limited to picks or harassing the front line or peeling. He can be very good at peeling, but I just feel like his numbers just kind of fall off as the game goes on. It becomes increasingly difficult for him to, like, be effective in fights. You can, but you got to land those, like, god hooks on the squishy targets to make him work. So he is still very good. He's just a lot less reliable. And I know I put Rakan up there, and Rakan also takes a lot of practice, but I just feel like, I don't know, the payoff for Rakan eventually at really high-level play, I think, is just maybe slightly higher than Thresh. But I don't know. Don't hate me if you love Thresh. I think he's wonderful. I wish he was more meta, but he just feels a little too fair compared to some of the other champs. Like, everything is a skill check. Nothing is given. You know, you got a skill check to get your E correct. Also, allies have to, like, actually click on your lantern, which a lot of times they just won't do. Enemies can interact with that too. They can stand on the lantern or throw wards on the lantern or whatever. So a lot of that can be problematic. But I still think he has a lot of potential. Okay, and I guess that's about it as far as, like, my detailed explanation. The rest of it I'll do pretty quickly because I do need to get out of here and get some other stuff done, and I don't want to take too long on this. But Nautilus, still going to be really effective. He's a low damage tank, but he has a lot of CC. He can be kind of mana hungry if you max his E, which more and more people are doing. That is a lot of damage in team fights. If you want to get something like a Frozen Heart, like we talked about earlier, that certainly helps. He's one of the few tanks that still actually is really mana hungry if you max E. His ultimate obviously has a ton of value, especially where there's a lot of mobility. They're not going to be able to dodge it. In most circumstances, there are very few mechanics that let people get around an Alistar ult. So really good, guaranteed power. Open field, his hook is probably the best, I would say. Really wide hitbox, really fast animation. However, it can't go over walls. So it's hard to really, again, punish those people when you're playing Nautilus that are playing, or that are trying to walk up and ward over the Baron Pit. Unless you, like, Hex Flash over the wall and open up on them, which, you know, that is a possibility. But it's just a little bit harder to get over walls, a little bit harder to punish people. Now, you can use that to escape from stuff, so that is pretty nice. If you time your hook correctly, you can actually hook through CC. If the CC hits first while your hook is midair, and then you're able to hook, like, your tower or something, then you can pull yourself through CC. So that's kind of an advanced mechanic, but can be pretty good. It's also, his hook is a displacement, so it can stop some of these other movement engaged champs. So stuff like a Rell crash down, stuff like an Alistar headbutt, stuff like Leona going in with her E, you can knock them out of that with your Q if you time that correctly. So again, Nautilus does at the very top end have a pretty high skill cap in terms of, again, doing stuff with your hook, but overall he's pretty simple to play and very effective in a lot of fights. I think Nautilus is really great. The only thing that holds him back are just his numbers. Like, his E is very expensive. It's still relatively low single target damage, although it's a lot in team fights. The hook is fairly low damage, and his stats overall, like his health, armor, stuff like that, is lower than a lot of the big tanks like Alistar and Leona. And his defensive steroid, his W with the shield, is not really that great. It's okay, but you need to put a lot of points in it to make it effective, and that means you're not putting points in the hook or putting points in the E. So that's problematic. And then Leona is still pretty good. Leona's biggest challenge is that all of her stuff are stuns. So that means that Cleanse and Mercury Treads are very, very effective against that. Versus Alistar is a knock-up. Rell, part of her kit, is a knock-up. And just pulling people in with the R. Magnetic Field. Rakan is a knock-up. All that stuff is very effective against Thresh, too. And Nautilus is a knock-up. But, yeah, Cleanse, just really good against Leona. Mikhail's very good against Leona. So there's a lot of ways to counter what she's trying to do. But if you don't have those things, then she's very effective. Also, she's shorter range than some of the other champs. As far as her E, her R is very telegraphed, and you can dodge it pretty easily. And there's a lot of mobility in the game right now. So it can be hard to hit those Rs on some of the high mobility backline champs. But she still, does a ton of damage. She's extremely tanky, especially early on. Aftershock plus her W makes her really tanky. So she's great at diving towers. Not quite as good as Alistar, but still pretty nice. And her damage is relatively high. Not like through the roof. It has been nerfed a bit over time. But I believe it's probably higher than, almost certainly higher than Nautilus. Probably higher than Alistar, Rell, maybe Rakan. It depends. Probably higher than Rakan, but Rakan has the shields and the heals to go with that. But yeah, she's very effective, and she can get to the backline really easily because her E goes through everything and her R goes through everything to get to the backline. So very effective offensively. However, she's really risky. You don't have any escapes, right? So Nautilus can kind of hook his way out of stuff. Rell can run away from things. Rakan can dash away from things. Alistar can just pop ult, and it's going to be really hard to kill him. But Leona, if you go in and it's a bad time to go in, or if you're pushed up too far and you get ganked, you're probably going to die. There's almost no escapes. Everything that you do is going to be like pulling you forward. So you just got to be aware. You're probably going down with the ship if you go in on Leona, or if you get ganked or surprised. So you got to be careful with that. Lulu, still going to be very strong. Her kit is amazing. It's just the numbers on it are down. Her W is now 17 seconds at all ranks. I think you used to be able to get it down to 12 seconds when you max W. But the shield is still really good. Provides a really big shield itself, but also puts picks on people, which in the mid game is about 80 extra damage per auto attack. So that's, really good, especially on champs that scale really well with attack speed. Historically, stuff like Vayne, stuff like Twitch. Obviously, what's her name? The Lightning Girl is Zeri. Is extremely good with Lulu as well. And that's pretty much the only place you see her in pro is with Zeri, I think. But still going to be very effective. Really good with Ardent Sensor. Her ultimate, point click, knock up, massive amount of health, is not affected by heal cut. Q actually has a decent amount of wave clear in the very early game, like levels 1 to 3. If you're not getting pressured too hard, you can use that Q to help your ADC kind of push in and get priority. So she's got a lot of stuff about her. She's just been somewhat nerfed recently, and she's got a slightly lower win rate than some of the other enchanters, but she's extremely good, especially with the right matchup. Again, if you have an ADC that really likes attack speed, that you want to protect, she's very good. And the polymorph on the W is still very strong. A strong piece of C is like 2.25 second disable. Now they can still move while they're polyed, but it's going to be effective. Okay, and then Senna, if she's farming her souls well, she can still be, really effective. I think they have nerfed Umbral to some extent. Like, the ward clearing on it is nerfed. I think they did give it some more AD. And she does have a bunch of different builds you can build, but especially against, enchanters or just other stuff that's not going to be able to pressure you early, if you just get to farm them for souls, she can scale and be extremely strong as a nice damage option later on. You've also got that global pressure with your ult. So she has quite a bit of utility. So almost like a Lux-esque type of champ early, but I think scales better in that you want to pair her with a Caitlyn or a Jhin or something like that that's just going to pressure and get priority and just be able to poke and harass people to get those souls. So pretty effective, but if you get hard engaged on, it's a problem. You're probably going to die. She's very squishy. She does not have any mobility outside of going into the shadows, which that can be effective to get away from like a Nautilus ult because he can't target you or anybody else. Same thing with Alistar. Unless they get close, they can't target you. But, some of these hook type of champions, your Blitzcranks, your Threshes, your Leona, stuff like that, they can still get you. Okay, and then Poppy has kind of been the flavor of the month or two. She has been getting played in the jungle and in support. I think that she's mostly a counter pick, played into Rell, Alistar, Rakan, anything that wants to go in. It's pretty good, like Nautilus, Leona. I think she's probably going to get smoked by a lot of enchanters early that are becoming a bit more popular, or stuff that has a wider hook where they don't go in. So stuff like a Thresh, stuff like a Blitzcrank can be tough. Although I'll say, even playing Rakan, like Poppy is annoying early, but I feel like she just gets outscaled really hard later on. Like, if you can just afford to wait out her little circle thing, then she just feels like she doesn't do anything in fights. If you're really good at hitting your ult and knocking, the right person out of the fight, that can be okay. But I feel like her damage really falls off pretty hard, and her CC is very situational. Like, you have to tackle people into walls, which can be very effective if you get it. But I think that she's just a very situational type of champ that's really extreme, where you have that counter engage, and it's nice if you can kind of snowball off of that early. But I feel that a lot of the itemization and just kind of your usefulness in fights definitely falls off after that, because your Q's just not going to do a lot unless you have a lot of items. At a certain point, the tackle is not going to do a lot unless you are hitting them into walls for stuns. And the ult, you really have to be able to, hit that channeled ult to get a lot of effectiveness out of it. And obviously, it's very telegraphed, and there's a lot of mobility in the game to potentially dodge it. So, anyway, she's okay, but she's just primarily used as a counter for mobility with that one ability, but once that's on cooldown, it starts to feel bad. Okay, and that's going to be it. Thank you very much. Like I said, I wanted to keep this under an hour if possible. I think there's a lot of good stuff going on right now out there. I think there's a lot of champs that can win. There's nothing that feels like it's suffocatingly dominant in solo queue, like you have to pick or ban that champ right now. So I think ultimately the game's in a good spot. I know that there are a lot of critics how the game is right now, but I think it's fine. I think it's fun. I like it. So anyways, that's it. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. Come by, check out the stream sometime if you can find it. Like I said, these days it's probably like 2 to 4 in the afternoon if I can play with Jason, and then sometimes later in the weekends. But that's it. Thanks. Have a good day. We'll see you by next time.